All right, howdy everyone. Welcome back. We're in, it looks like, part 4 of our Learning Gatsby here. I'm prepping a Gatsby for WordPress course, and basically I'm just walking through this tutorial here so that we could understand how all of it works. And we haven't got into the WordPress part of it now, but we are getting into data and the GraphQL stuff, which is pretty exciting. So we're going to go through this, and as always, I'll kind of point out some stuff that I have some background with or some extra parts of it and just kind of talk about it as we go along. So let's go ahead and get rocking. If you are enjoying this, please go ahead, like, subscribe, do all that. If you're watching live, say hi in the chat, and we'll go from there. All right, cool. So let's jump in. We are in this part of the tutorial. I'll throw this in the live chat here so that you can see the link, part 4 of it. And so far we've learned how to do the HTML and CSS stuff. So now we're going to get into how to access the data. And data in Gatsby can come from anywhere. So we can see we've got, let me switch that up. Keyboard, F1 key, and then we need our presentation assistant. Cool, now I can highlight. Okay, so data in Gatsby can come from Markdown, WordPress, any of the CMSs, really, Drupal, any of those. There's a lot of cool ones out there. And the way it's going to do this by default is through a plugin, but ultimately through GraphQL. So there's this great site, How to GraphQL, and if you haven't checked out this site, I highly suggest that you do. It's a pretty cool one. It's got a nice layout here and some good resources for how GraphQL works, and then you could plug it into if you want to know how to use GraphQL with Apollo, one of the popular clients that I really like, as well as some other ones. Great resources here. So at some point, go ahead and check out this site on GraphQL, but you don't need to do this or know all of this to start. And in fact, we're going to kind of skip over needing to know it because the basic queries we're going to make with GraphQL are pretty simple. All right, so do I have to use GraphQL? No. In fact, there's a function inside of Gatsby called create pages, and you could just pull in data from anywhere. You could have static data stored in any kind of file or format, like just an object of all your data or an array, or you can make an API request using REST or something that you're already familiar with and pull that in and programmatically call create pages. So there's this great tutorial here called create or using Gatsby without GraphQL, and it shows a really simple example of how you can make an async function that will get data. They're using the Pokemon API. So they create a single page, and we'll learn about all of this create page in more depth, but it's pretty simple to see what's going on here. They create a page with the root of nothing and then require a component, all Pokemon, and pass in Pokemon that was the Pokemon they queried, right? This is just making an API call. And then all Pokemon for each, they'll create a page for each one of these at Pokemon slash, oops, sorry about that, at Pokemon slash whatever the name of theirs is, and they'll require a template and pass in that each Pokemon. So you can kind of see at a high level how create pages works. All right. Now you could do this, and there's a lot of discussions on whether you should be using GraphQL or whether you shouldn't. But I like at the very beginning, we just do things as simple as possible. And they get into unstructured data versus GraphQL, as I mentioned. Anytime you really do want to be going into the plugin library, like let's say we're going to be using WordPress later, there are several different WordPress ways of enqueuing, including the main Gatsby source one. We could see that there are a few different forks of that as well. And at some point in this series, we'll even learn how to make our own plugins, and we could do that. So create pages can be done via a plugin. You don't have to manually set them up, and that's going to be really common to do. All right, so now it's asking, how do we get all of this data into GraphQL? So even if we're not using a CMS that has GraphQL or something like that, we'll still be writing some GraphQL queries even to get stuff within Gatsby. So we will get comfortable with it. And this points out that this is a query language, much like SQL is. It's got a different format. It was created by the folks at Facebook. And the number one thing about GraphQL that's great is it's very declarative. So in a normal REST API, let's say we're using WordPress, we hit the post API and we get 20 different things. We may not need some of them. With this, we could specify just what we need and get only what we need, including be able to combine multiple queries to build that. So in order to do this, we're going to build a new site, and it's going to be called Tutorial Part 4. So I'm just in my Gatsby stuff here. You can see I've followed along so far. I finally have a Git repo for this that you can check out at GitHub, Z Gordon. And I'm just going to paste this in. So Gatsby, well, let me try to type a little bit more here. I'll type some of it. Okay, so Gatsby. Yay, more Gatsby. Rob, what's up, man? How's it going? Good to see you again. All right, so Gatsby new, and we're going to call this tutorial 4. And now I need to paste in this link, so I'm not going to type all this manually. I'll just copy it. And as we know, there are starters in Gatsby, and this is just the Hello World starter. So that's going to give us something super, super basic, not really much at all, but we'll just check this out once it goes ahead and downloads everything. We'll go ahead and CD into it. We can kind of see as it's going here what it's getting. Yeah, we can see that there's already an index page and there's some of the basic stuff set up already for us. So that's kind of nice. And now we'll just CD into our tutorial part. Is that not one? I just called it tutorial 4, sorry. Actually, let me go ahead and just change that so that it's all part 4. Howdy, howdy, folks. Thanks for popping in and saying hi. Hope you're enjoying learning Gatsby with me or on your own. It's pretty cool stuff. Okay, so now we could tune into tutorial part 4. Great. All right, then we need some other dependencies. It's going to use some typography themes and the emotion CSS library. So let's go. If you haven't checked this out, this is one of the popular CSS and JavaScript libraries. So style components, emotion, glamour, some of those type ones. All right, so we're going to want that as well. We're going to want the Gatsby plugin typography. We want the typography. We want React typography, typography theme Kirkham, and Gatsby plugin emotion as well as emotion core. So I'm just going to copy all of this and paste that in as one big npm install, which should give us everything that we need. So now it's going to tell us to go through and start creating a few different pages and things like that. We want our layout component. I'll go ahead and just open this up inside source. We don't have this yet, so we'll go ahead and create our components. Again, we learned about components and nested components and all sorts of cool stuff you could do with that before. So we're just, new file inside components called layout.js. And let's go ahead and code some of this out. Okay, so first we're going to need React from React. And then we're going to need CSS from Glamour, or from, sorry, from Emotion. So Emotion core. And then import link from Gatsby. Cool. And then we're going to be using rhythm, which is a way of setting responsive heights and stuff like that, margins and things. And that's going to be from a file we haven't actually created yet. So it's going to say utils typography. But if you look inside our folder, we have no utils, right? So we're inside components, we go back one, we should have a utils typography. And actually later on in that tutorial, it's going to show us how to create that. So let's just keep going. Okay, so that will give us what we need. Now we can export a default, and we're going to be getting children in through this. Remember, our layout wraps our pages. No, sorry, we do want that. Okay. And so we'll kind of be passing in our pages to this, and this will be our main wrapper. So we're going to set up a div, and we will add some CSS to this. So div CSS is going to be equal to, and this is using the emotion, so if you're not familiar with this format, but it should look familiar if you've done some CSS in your JavaScript. We've played around a little bit with this, so 0 auto. We're going to center things, max width to set things up that way. Padding is going to be equal to, we're going to use our rhythm here for that, so we'll say rhythm, and we'll make that 1.5. So that will just kind of responsively set the best padding possible. Oh, sorry, that's going to be, padding is going to be 2. And then padding top is going to be, hey Jack, welcome. Cool. Okay, so then padding top will be a little bit more. Great. Now we could go ahead and inside of this div, we don't want that self-closing. Let's go ahead and close that on its own. Now we could go ahead and put in a link, which we have imported from Gatsby. So we'll say link is going to be to, and this will just go to the home page. Right? So that'll just go home. That's a great link. And inside of here, we could put an H3. And it looks like it's adding some CSS to that, but I'll just put the title, Pandas Eating Lots. All right, so let's add some CSS. We do CSS, and then we do CSS again, and pass in the actual CSS that we want. So now margin bottom is going to have some rhythm. I'll just copy this over rather than typing it again. Cool, display inline block, and then font style will be normal. Cool. All right, so that's one link, and then we need a link to an about page. So let's set up another one. I'll say link, and that's going to be equal to /about. Great, that looks good. And then that's just going to say about, because going to our about page. And then finally, inside of that div, but after all of our links, we could pass in the children. And that's going to be what the actual page content is, right? So I think that that is looking good from this first one. Now it wants us to go ahead and create an index page. So we actually already have an index page, but it's not doing much. It's just saying hello world. So let's modify this a bit. And we need to import our layout that we just built. So we'll go into our components and we'll pull out our layout.js. And now we can call that here. And anything that we put inside of here will be the children that then gets passed inside of here and then put right there at the end. Cool, so that's how these layouts again work. Again, if you don't remember, just go back and check out the past ones. We played around with that a bit in the past. Pandas eating things. Cool. And now we've got another div and we've got an image inside. I'm just going to copy this for ease. Yeah. Group of pandas eating bamboo. Cool, that's our index page. Now let's go ahead and create an about page. I'm just going to copy this because I have a feeling it's going to be a little similar. About.js. And what are we doing here on our about page? Let's go ahead and delete this. All right, so we've got our layout. Now I've got an H1, about pandas eating lots. Cool, and then we've got a paragraph tag, and I'm just gonna copy this, make it a little bit easier. Paste that in there, sweet, good to go. Okay, so now we should have two pages. We've got our home page, we've got that, we've got a layout, but we also are calling this rhythm typography, and we haven't set that file up yet. So I think next on the list, yes, is we've got to go ahead and create this. So inside of source, I love these tutorials, they're so good. Inside of source utils, panda stereotypes, yeah, that they eat a lot. I think they do eat a lot though, but we're not judging. Big, beautiful creatures, right? I love me some pandas. So no panda hate, acceptance, but I'm pretty sure that they eat, how much does average panda eat? 20 to 40 pounds a day. That's not much. You're right. You know what? That's not a lot. Let's be kind to those pandas. The appropriate amount of eating pandas. You know what I'm saying? I like it. Okay. Sorry, back to Gatsby. Importing typography from typography, and that's a lowercase. And for those who don't know, you'll see this a lot working with Gatsby because, oh, did I not? I didn't name that right. Typography.js. Cool. Looks better. Typography is, I believe, a Kyle project. npm typography. Yeah. From Kyle Matthews, the creator of Gatsby. So this is used in a lot of the tutorials. You've seen it already, and pretty nice. I like it so far. I haven't really played with it much on my own, but in all these tutorials I use it, and it's pretty nice. So Kirkham theme is one of the specific ones, and I don't really know what that looks like, but we have it right there. And now we're going to create some stuff that will export. And this is just like to help set up his library, and all this stuff is documented. So we're going to create a new typography, and we're going to pass in this theme. And I believe that you could set up multiple typographies in this way, and then we'll just export this as the default. Typography, cool. And then we'll also import or export not as a default, but we'll export rhythm, which is what we were using before, which is basically just typography.rhythm. So if you're wondering where that came from, that's not normal CSS. That is from this library that will allow us to set nice vertical heights and everything and all that. I think wide widths too. Okay, so next we need a Gatsby config file. So typography.js utils, that is something that we just set up on our own to manage our own typography library that we're using. Pages make sense and component layout makes sense as well. We have not played a ton with Gatsby config, but that can't go inside of source. As it points out, it must be in the root of your project. So I'm going to go underneath tutorial 4, and I'm going to do Gatsby config. And this holds a bunch of different things inside of it, including one of them that is basically just what plugins you're using, right? So I'm going to type module.exports, and we'll set up the plugins that we want. And we've done this in some past tutorials, so this shouldn't be too new. This is going to take Gatsby plugin emotion. And some configurations there. It will resolve to Gatsby plugin typography. Some options there. I think I'm coding this right. Path to config module. And then we show it where the configuration is for this, right? So this is just a requirement for this. And different plugins and libraries are going to have different types of things. And all of this should always be documented. So it should show you, hey, go into your Gatsby config file and add this or add this to make sure that this plugin is configured properly. And I think that that's all we need. Okay, cool. So now it tells us, hey, go ahead and try Gatsby develop now, and let's see what happens. So I'll come down, I'm in my tutorial, Gatsby develop. And now I should be able to open up to, I think it's 8,000. Let's let it build, compiled successfully. Localhost 8,000. Cool. Messed up. I don't think this styling looks completely right. I think I missed some CSS. Let me go back up here. Yeah, I think I forgot that float right. So in my page layout, this about link here to CSS, yeah. Kind of gone through this before a while back, so that did not look right. All right, now we'll add our CSS, and we'll just say float right. Cool. Let's try that again. Yeah, now that's looking right. Okay, so we've got our home page that we set up with our image, and we've got our about page. Cool. Okay, so at this point, I don't think we've really done much new, right? All of that was the same. But it brings up this new idea, which is, what if we want to change the title of our main site? So this isn't something that you'd probably need to do a lot, but it does give us a great introduction to GraphQL, because we'll actually set up a preference in our site, some metadata that has this title, and then we'll be able to pull it in using GraphQL. So it points out that the place for common bits of data is in the Gatsby config file. So in addition to all of the different Hey, thank you, y'all. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? We might have missed a few minutes of that stuff. Basically, hopefully that is better. There's a button on there, and if I don't press it, it cuts off after 30 minutes. Let me know if that's sounding better, guys. Hopefully that's good. Okay, so what I was saying is that I'm not sure if we could change site metadata, if that is possible or not, but let's just go ahead with this and we'll try it at the end to circle back and see if that works. And again, if the mic is working now, please let me know. Hopefully that's good. Great, sorry about that, y'all. Cool, we're back. All right, so yeah, now we need to restart the development server. So whenever you're editing these main Gatsby config files, we'll have to run again Gatsby develop. Cool. So we kick that up, and now we check this out. And it can't reach it. Okay, it's got to build first. All right, so nothing has changed yet. We've added that, but now we need to do an actual query. Okay, so now we're going to get into querying using GraphQL, I believe. Yeah. All right. So let's come into our About page. So what it's going to say is it wants us to change this title right here to match what we just set up in our Gatsby config. So we want this title to appear right there. So we're going to come into our pages about.js, and then we're going to edit this right here. But in order to do that, we have to pull in actual GraphQL. So we haven't used that yet. This will be our first time, and we'll import GraphQL, all lowercase, from Gatsby. Cool. And then export default stays the same, but now when we use GraphQL, we're actually going to get data passed into it, okay? And we'll kind of create what I'm pretty sure is a higher order component. I'm not quite sure how this exactly works, but we'll see in a moment. So we're going to get some data in, and then instead of putting this title here, we're going to say data site metadata dot title. Cool. So that should work. However, how does it know what data to get? This is where GraphQL comes in. So in the bottom, we have to set up our own query. So when this file is exported as a page, it will export the actual layout and markup and pass the data in, but what data it gets will be dependent on this const query that it will know what to do with. So we'll say a GraphQL query, and if you haven't used this before, pretty simple language. Oops. First we say query, and then we're going to query site information, and then we're going to query site metadata, and then we're going to query the title within that. Okay, so this is setting up a query, going into Gatsby, our site, going into the site metadata, and then grabbing the title. So let's go ahead and see if this works. All right, refresh the page and site metadata title. Cool, it is working. We're now getting that nice title. Now the thing I was curious about, and this might not be a definitive test, but I wanted to see if I just change this to metadata here. Let's just call it meta to be super short. And then I changed this to be meta. I want to see if I could change this and break it, or if I could call site metadata whatever I want. I think we have to call it site metadata, but I'm not positive. So we'll run Gatsby develop again. And I suggest, as you're learning, when I'm learning, I go through all this stuff and just try out these different things, and it'll teach you along the way what works and what doesn't. So check this out. This fails. Meta is not allowed. Cool. So that tells us that we cannot call this thing meta and do whatever we want with it, that is going to break. So we're going to call it site metadata. We'll go back to that. We'll go back to site metadata in our code here in both places. Let's go ahead and run this again and make sure that it works. Cool. Okay, we're back to working and no broken code. It works. Sweet. So this is great, and inside of pages, we'll see that this is one of the ways that we can query data, and we'll get much more complex as we keep going with this series into GraphQL itself, as in how to query pages. However, the queries in pages work a little bit different than queries everywhere else in Gatsby. So what we're going to do now is get into something called static query. And if you're in a page, you could run a query because it's automatically going to be feeding data into it, and it's going to be dynamically built. However, If you're in a layout component or just a small random component somewhere, or if you're in a page and you just want to pull in data on your own, you could use what's called a static query. And it's static, it says somewhere, because it doesn't have dynamic data. Non-pages, it'll get into it in more depth. Yeah, it might be in one of the companion articles as well. But let's just keep on rolling and look at how to use static query. So static query is going to be very similar to what we did on our page, and we're in our About page. But remember, static query is for any component, not just pages. And the syntax is a teeny bit different. So let's go ahead and look at this. We've got link from Gatsby. We're going to need something. Oh, thanks. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for popping by. Howdy and welcome. Glad you caught the live stream. Okay, so we're going to need to use this use static query, and then we're going to need to pull in GraphQL as well. And all of that is loaded with Gatsby. We've already got rhythm. That stuff shouldn't change. Okay, so inside of children, the first thing we have to do is this is just returning a div. So instead of returning a div, we need to be able to get some data on our own as a variable, which means instead of returning directly, we need to wrap this and then return here. And now we can put a variable like const data. All right, so now we're going to call use static query. And now we can just put in a GraphQL query. Super cool. So we'll say GraphQL, and what are we going to query? All right, we're going to set up a query, and we're going to query the site, which then means that we could then get the site metadata. Hi, howdy folks, thanks for coming by and saying howdy. Hope you're enjoying the Gatsby live stream, learning here with me, getting prepped for cool things, staying up on the cutting edge of WordPress dev, y'all. All right, so we use a static query, and notice the only difference between this and pages is in pages we could just call query and it will all work. But there's this extra step where we have to call use static query, passive GraphQL, and then put our query in. But the query itself is the exact same, all right? So all of this is the same, just we have to wrap it and use it in use static query because these are not dynamic pages in the same way. All right, let's see. I've got a warning. Let's just keep going. Data is assigned but not using. Oh, thank you so much, WP developer. Appreciate it. Okay, so we use this, we get this data, but we're not using it anywhere. So we could just come into our title right here. I think that's what it's going to do. Yep. And now we could say data site metadata dot title. And we learned something really important here. We learned that data is going to be a variable, whatever we call it. Oops, I didn't mean to run that code. Dope. Yeah, gotta love the instruments. Music. Make music, man. Got off track here. Does it get the... Okay, yeah, we could call data whatever because this is a variable we set up. But the site, that's something specific to Gatsby, and site metadata. We can't just call this data or meta or whatever, right? So we're learning Gatsby-specific queries here on how to get things within Gatsby like a site title. Now we could go and put in other metadata, a description, other information like that, but this first part looks like it's got to be this way. All right, so now if we go back and test our site, yeah, we can see it's live working, and we didn't have to reboot the server this time. That was cool. So that's all good. It shows us that it's working. And then it talks about a little bit more. We'll get into more of this in part 7. We got to get a little bit further there. And yeah, if we change this stuff in our Gatsby config title, it should just automatically work. So let's try that. If we go Gatsby config title, and let's change it back to pandas eating lots. Pandas eating the right amount for them. Right? Okay, let's make that shorter. Let's just call it pandas eating. Cool. Pandas eating, and that's updating live. Cool. All right, so some of these things like what plugins we're using and stuff. Benefit of using Gatsby and WordPress, that's a little bit high level for what I'm going to talk about in this live stream because I'm just trying to take it, teach everything. But if you take the course, I'll get into all that. It's mostly speed and security and developer experience are the top 3 reasons for using Gatsby and WordPress. Cool. So that's it. We worked through part 4, folks. That's what I wanted to show you today. I'm going to be getting into part 5 pretty soon. I'm on full time now. This is my focus, is getting this course out because I've got a lot more to teach than just Gatsby. But if you want to go back, check out the live stream for the past parts. And then if you want to look ahead, source plugins. So this is going to be when we start hooking into Markdown, when we start hooking into WordPress, programmatically creating pages, and then pushing the site live. So we got some cool stuff coming up. Keep tuning in. Again, please follow, subscribe, like, all that good stuff. Check out the course. You can get it on pre-order for I think it's like a half-price discount if you get it on pre-order. And hopefully you will find all that helpful. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off here, folks. Thanks for popping in, and check back next time. I'll keep it coming this week with more of these, trying to plow through them all. Ciao, everyone.